The house waited for him in silence. It sat on a lonesome road that even the wind seemed to avoid, surrounded by skeletal trees that whispered dry secrets to each other when night fell. Owen Hale stood at the edge of the cracked driveway, his boots sinking into the damp earth. The structure ahead wasn't just abandoned, it looked forgotten by time itself. Its windows were cataracts of dust, its porch sagged like a dying lung, and yet, beneath the layers of rot and ruin, Owen felt something, some pulse, faint and patient, as though the house had been waiting. He had bought it sight unseen, the way he often did when chasing bargains that others were too cautious to touch. But this one was different. The listing had vanished from every database minutes after he purchased it, and the real estate agent who handled the sale never answered his calls again. When the paperwork arrived, there was no signature, just a thumbprint pressed into the bottom corner in what looked disturbingly like ash. He told himself it was a glitch, a bureaucratic anomaly, something explainable. He was good at rationalizing things that didn't quite make sense. But as he crossed the threshold, the air changed. It wasn't smell or temperature, it was frequency. His ears popped, like stepping off a descending elevator, and his phone screen flickered into static. The floorboards groaned beneath him, but the sound had a strange precision to it, almost mechanical. When he pressed a hand against the wall, the wood was warm. Not from sunlight or heating, it throbbed gently, like flesh remembering a heartbeat. He exhaled slowly, running his hand through his hair. "All right, old girl," he muttered, forcing a chuckle. "Let's see what you've got hiding in here." Dust motes floated in the beam of his flashlight, glimmering faintly as if reacting to the light. The living room was cluttered with relics from decades past. Newspapers from the 1980s, furniture covered in gray shrouds, a rusted phonograph standing like an altar. He moved deeper inside, boots scuffing the warped boards. The house creaked at every step, though sometimes the sound came from ahead of him, as if anticipating his next move. When he reached the staircase, he stopped. Along the banister, someone, or something, had carved symbols into the wood. Circular, intersecting, symmetrical in a way that felt too deliberate for human hands. The grooves emitted a faint metallic shimmer. He rubbed his thumb over one of the symbols and felt an almost imperceptible vibration. His flashlight dimmed for half a second. Owen had restored dozens of houses in his life, mansions, manors, decaying cottages, but this one made him feel like an intruder in a place that remembered everything. Every nail seemed to hum with tension. Every corner held its breath. He spent the rest of the afternoon clearing out debris, forcing himself to ignore the strange noises that rose from beneath the floorboards, soft thuds, metallic scraping, sometimes a rhythm that almost resembled breathing. He dismissed it all as the foundation settling. Old houses did that. He told himself that 1,000 times as daylight drained from the windows and the air grew colder, heavier. When he finally collapsed into a chair, darkness had swallowed the horizon outside. He cracked open a beer, flipped through a journal he'd found in the kitchen, one that belonged to the previous owner, if there had been one. The handwriting was jagged, rushed. Pages filled with notes about the resonance and the pulse under the cellar. The final entry was a single sentence. "It's not a house. It's a shell." The bottle froze halfway to his lips. A sound came then, so soft he thought it was his imagination. A faint tapping, from somewhere below him. Slow, deliberate, steady. Tap. 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 He followed the sound across the living room, crouched near the floor, ear tilted toward the boards. It wasn't pipes. It wasn't animals. It was too patterned, too human, or almost human. He fetched a crowbar and pried up a plank near where the tapping was strongest. Beneath it, a layer of insulation and concrete. He pressed his ear again. Now the tapping was replaced by something else, a whisper, so low it felt like it slid directly into his skull rather than through his ears. Words too faint to understand. He recoiled, heart pounding, and dropped the plank back into place. That night, he dreamed of corridors running beneath the house, endless and dark. Of walls breathing, of whispers turning into voices that called his name. He woke just before dawn to the faint hum of his phone, though there was no signal. The screen displayed a single word he didn't type: run. He went outside, desperate for fresh air, for rationality. The cold morning light brought the world back into focus, until he saw the ground near the porch. The soil had risen in a perfect circle, as if something beneath it was pushing upward. He knelt and brushed away the dirt. Underneath lay metal, not pipes, not wiring, but a smooth, curved surface that glinted faintly in the sunlight. He tapped it with his crowbar. The vibration it gave off traveled through his arm and into his chest, where it lingered like an echo of another heartbeat. Owen staggered back, breathing hard. This was no ordinary foundation. He crouched again, pushing the soil away with trembling fingers, revealing more of the strange metal, almost organic in texture, like polished bone fused with machinery. It curved deeper into the earth, as though it wrapped around something large. The wind rose suddenly, carrying a faint sound from beneath the ground. Not the scraping of metal. Not the sigh of settling earth. A voice. Weak. Broken. Whispering in a language he didn't know, but begging, unmistakably, for help. He stumbled to his feet and backed away, the old house looming behind him like a watching creature. The windows reflected nothing but sky, yet he felt their gaze. He told himself to leave, to call someone, to sell the property and forget it. But the whispering didn't stop. Even as he packed his tools and slammed the truck door, he could still hear it, soft, persistent, and undeniably alive. By the time he turned the ignition, the house had gone completely silent. Only the hum beneath the ground remained, steady and slow, as if something deep below was awakening after a long, long sleep. He came back 2 days later. He told himself it was just to check the wiring, to make sure no squatters had broken in, to prove that the whisper he heard had only been wind under the floorboards. But as Owen parked his truck in front of the sagging porch, the lie dissolved the moment he saw the house again. It wasn't merely sitting there, it seemed to be leaning toward him, as though recognizing its intruder. The air was too still, too watchful. The leaves around the yard were perfectly motionless despite the passing of a cold front. He carried his flashlight and tools into the house. Dust coated everything in a fine, gray layer, but there were footprints across the hallway that weren't his. Small, bare, and faintly outlined in something that shimmered, like liquid metal drying to dust. He followed them to the trapdoor in the basement he hadn't noticed before. A heavy metal plate had been bolted over it, edges welded crudely into the floor. He crouched and ran his palm along the seam. The metal wasn't cold, it vibrated faintly under his skin, humming like distant electricity. Something was beneath. He worked the bolts loose with a wrench, each one releasing a strange, harmonic note instead of the usual grind of rust. When the last bolt came free, a thin line of pale light appeared along the crack, seeping upward in pulsing rhythm. He hesitated, his reflection trembling across the metallic surface. Then he pried the plate open. A wave of air rolled out. Cold, dry, and filled with the scent of something ancient. Beneath him yawned a narrow chamber lit by a soft white glow, walls lined with ribbed metal that seemed grown, not built. At the center, a small shape lay curled within a network of pale restraints that shimmered with a faint electric pulse. It was a girl. At first, he thought she might be human, a malnourished child trapped in some deranged bunker. But when he climbed down the rusted ladder and the light hit her skin, every rational thought fled. Her skin was not flesh but smooth silver with faint veins of blue light tracing beneath. Thin ridges ran along her arms and collarbone, glimmering like circuitry woven into muscle. Her hair clung to her shoulders like dark glass, fractured and yet soft. She stirred at the sound of his boots. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes that were liquid gold, the irises fracturing like data shards when the light shifted. For a moment she only stared, breathing shallowly, her gaze flickering between his face and the crowbar in his hand. Then, weakly, she tried to pull away, but the restraints tightened, glowing brighter in protest. The light from them flickered through the chamber, syncing with her heartbeat. "Easy," he whispered, raising both hands. "I'm not going to hurt you." Her lips moved. The sound that came out wasn't speech, it was a modulation of tones, faintly melodic, like the house itself was trying to understand the meaning. She flinched when he approached, her body trembling. The restraints pulsed harder, and suddenly the air was thick with static. Sparks leapt from the walls, and for an instant the chamber filled with a sound like distant thunder. Then silence. He knelt beside her, examining the restraints. They weren't metal, more like energy trapped in solid form, luminous bands of woven light that reacted when touched. When his fingers brushed one, it disintegrated into vapor. The others followed suit, dissolving into nothing. The girl gasped, curling into herself, as if the act of being free was painful. Owen hesitated. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, that he was trespassing into something beyond comprehension. But he couldn't leave her there. He wrapped her trembling body in his coat, feeling the faint hum of energy beneath her skin, and carried her up the ladder. The house groaned above, dust falling from the ceiling like ash. When they reached the living room, the lights flickered on though the power had long been cut. The bulbs pulsed with the same rhythm as the glowing veins on her neck. He set her down on the couch, watching her eyes dart around, frightened but aware. "What happened to you?" he asked softly. She didn't answer. Instead, she raised a trembling hand and touched his wrist. A jolt ran through him, not painful, but deep, like the vibration of a forgotten memory. Images flashed behind his eyes, dark corridors filled with red light, metallic creatures whispering in mechanical tones, a cage suspended in liquid light. He staggered back, gasping. She recoiled, as if ashamed of what she had shown him. Outside, thunder cracked, a sound too sudden, too deliberate. The windows vibrated, and for a moment, the glass shimmered with faint geometric patterns, the same symbols carved into the staircase. He turned toward the door, expecting a storm. Instead, the sky beyond was clear and still. But above the tree line, three dark shapes moved silently, like elongated aircraft with no lights, their surfaces rippling like water. They were scanning the area, beams of invisible light sweeping the forest. Owen froze. The girl's breathing quickened. She whispered something, one word this time, soft, broken, but unmistakable. "Run." He turned toward her, but before he could respond, the lights in the house died. The machines outside shifted course, their silhouettes darkening the windows. A low hum filled the air, rising in pitch until the walls themselves began to tremble. Owen grabbed the girl, her body light as air, and stumbled toward the back door. Every step he took, the floor vibrated with strange energy, as if the house were alive, pushing him onward. When he reached the threshold, the humming ceased. The forest beyond was drenched in cold moonlight, eerily silent. He turned back for one final look at the house, and froze. Through the window, the furniture was floating. Every object inside hung suspended in midair, rotating slowly, encased in a dim halo of blue light. The walls pulsed outward, breathing like lungs. The house was transforming, awakening. And beneath it all, faint but growing stronger, came the sound of metal shifting underground, like something enormous turning over in its sleep. Owen didn't remember how far he ran. The night blurred into streaks of silver and shadow as branches whipped across his face and the alien girl clung to his chest, light flickering from beneath her skin with every shuddering breath she took. Behind them, the house pulsed like a dying star, its windows glowing from within, sending faint tremors through the earth. He could still hear the hum following him, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to crawl through his bones, chasing them deeper into the woods. When he finally stopped, breath burning in his lungs, the forest was silent again. The girl stirred, eyes glinting faintly in the darkness. She looked weaker than before, as though every pulse of light beneath her skin cost her something vital. He set her down gently near a cluster of rocks, wrapping her again in his jacket. Who are they? He whispered, glancing back toward the faint horizon where the machines had hovered. What do they want with you? She tilted her head, struggling to understand. Her voice came out fractured, like radio static merging with human tones. Searchers, find, interface. Her hand trembled as she reached for the soil, pressing her fingers into the dirt. A faint ripple spread outward, the earth vibrating beneath her touch. They made prison. Owen crouched, his mind spinning. The house? She looked at him, eyes wide with something that almost resembled sorrow. House, shell. Machine, heart. The word sent a chill through him. He thought of the walls that pulsed, the circuits buried in the wood, the metal under the porch that felt alive. He thought of how the lights in the house had matched her heartbeat. The truth formed slowly in his mind, terrifying in its simplicity. The house had been built to contain her. Not a prison in a human sense, but a containment vessel, an organism designed to suppress whatever she was. He glanced up at the sky. One of the aircraft was still there, far above the clouds now, a faint shimmer of light moving with unnatural precision. We can't stay here, he said. The girl nodded weakly. They trace resonance. He didn't know how she managed to say so much with so few words, but he understood enough. They could track her energy, maybe through sound, maybe through something else entirely. He lifted her again, surprised at how light she was, and made his way toward the road. By dawn, they reached an abandoned service station on the highway. He pried the lock off the door and carried her inside. The building smelled of oil and old dust, but at least it offered shelter. He set her down on the counter, then rummaged through his truck for water and a first aid kit. When he returned, she was sitting upright, staring at the faded map on the wall. The glow from her veins had dimmed to a faint pulse. You need food, he said quietly. Water. I don't even know what you eat. Her golden eyes flicked toward him, unblinking. Light, she said after a moment, and pointed weakly to the window. Sun. He pulled the curtain aside, letting the first rays of morning spill in. The light touched her skin, and for a moment, her body shimmered like quicksilver. The faint blue patterns beneath her skin began to move faster, forming delicate geometric shapes that reminded him of constellations. She exhaled softly, relief passing across her strange, delicate face. He sat down across from her, rubbing his temples. You're not from here. Not from Earth. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Fell. Long ago. Caught in field. Humans found. Used. Her words came fragmented, but each carried weight, like shards of memory struggling to reform. They take parts. Learn, build cage. He leaned forward, trying to piece it together. They experimented on you. Tried to use your technology. Her gaze darkened, and the air around her vibrated faintly. Not technology. Life. The word struck him harder than he expected. There was a tone in her voice, an echo of pain, but also something vast, like the memory of entire worlds collapsing into silence. Before he could respond, the air outside shifted. A low hum rose again, different this time, closer, sharper. He darted to the window. A black drone hovered over the asphalt, its surface rippling with hexagonal patterns, lenses rotating silently as they scanned the area. Down, he hissed, pulling her away from the light. The drone drifted closer, scanning the building with a thin beam that burned faint lines across the glass. He grabbed a crowbar from his toolkit and held his breath. The beam swept across the room, lingered on the counter where she had sat, and then, without warning, the drone emitted a sharp tone and accelerated upward, vanishing into the sky. She looked at him, her breathing quick. They found. Owen's pulse thundered. Then we move now. They left everything behind, slipping into the woods on the far side of the highway. As they moved through the trees, he noticed the air thickening again, the same subtle vibration that had filled the house. When he looked back, the ground behind them shimmered faintly with faint blue filaments, like roots of light burrowing into the soil. "Lyra," he said suddenly, the name falling from his mouth before he realized it. "Your name. Is it Lyra?" She blinked, startled by the sound. Then she nodded, almost imperceptibly. "Yes. Lyra." Something eased inside him when she said it. A name made her real. Made her something more than a vision of light and fear. By nightfall, they reached the edge of a lake, still and dark beneath the rising moon. Owen set her down by the shore and stared at the reflection of the stars in the water. Some of them flickered, not with the random twinkle of distance, but in patterns, structured, deliberate, like signals. Lyra followed his gaze. "Home," she whispered. "Still calling." He watched her expression, the faint light of her skin reflecting in his eyes. "Can you answer them?" She hesitated. "No. Broken. House took signal. Sent, wrong." "Wrong to who?" he asked. Lyra turned her gaze toward the forest, where distant lights now moved between the trees, cold, searching, deliberate. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "Hunters." And as the wind began to rise again, carrying the faint scent of ozone and metal, Owen realized that freeing her hadn't just woken something buried beneath the earth. It had sent a message into the sky, and whatever had answered was already on its way. The forest had grown darker than any night Owen could remember, yet the shadows themselves seemed to shimmer with a strange iridescence, bending light in impossible ways. He moved carefully, every snapped twig and shifted leaf magnified in his ears, each step a reminder that they were being hunted. Lyra clung to him, lighter than a human child but thrumming with a subtle vibration that pulsed through his body, warning him with each beat. They had been running for hours, avoiding the highway and any signs of civilization. Every so often, he glimpsed shapes moving between the trees, drones, but unlike anything built by human hands. Sleek, black, with surfaces that rippled and reflected the faint starlight like liquid metal. Their lenses rotated slowly, emitting scanning pulses he could feel more than hear, subtle waves that made his teeth rattle and the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Lyra whispered something, fragmented, but he understood enough. "Hunters, close. Too many, cannot hide forever." Her hand pressed against his chest, and he felt the pulsing energy beneath her skin spike, rhythmic and insistent, like a drumbeat guiding them forward. The path opened into a clearing, and Owen recognized the ruins of an old observatory, long abandoned and overtaken by vines and cracked concrete. The telescope had collapsed inward, its lens shattered, yet the building still carried a strange aura, as if it remembered the precise alignment of the stars it had once tracked. He helped Lyra inside through a side entrance, careful to avoid the crumbling steps. Inside, dust hung like fog, and the air smelled faintly of ozone, metal, and rain-soaked earth. Lyra moved to the center of the floor, knees bent, and pressed her palms against the cracked concrete. The energy beneath her skin flared, pulsing through the floor and resonating with a hum that filled the room. Owen's flashlight flickered as wires embedded in the walls reacted to her presence. He realized slowly that the observatory itself was more than a ruin, it was a node, a dormant interface waiting for someone like her. She spoke, voice quivering but steady, words forming faster than before. "Veil, dormant. Machine, below. Must awaken, stabilize." He crouched beside her, staring at the floor where her fingers pressed into fissures. Patterns of blue and silver light spread outward, forming lines that traced circuits he couldn't comprehend, geometries that twisted in impossible angles. The hum intensified, vibrating through the air, and he felt it echo inside his skull like the pulse of a distant planet. Suddenly, the building shuddered. Outside, the hunters had arrived in force. He glimpsed them through a broken window, black vehicles and drones forming a perimeter around the clearing. Their movements were precise, coordinated, almost preternatural. They weren't here for negotiation, they were here to extract, to capture, to take. Owen's pulse raced. Lyra, what do we do? Her eyes glowed, brighter now, constellations shifting across her skin. Activate. Veil, must connect. Owen didn't fully understand, but he trusted her. She began moving her hands in intricate motions, tracing patterns in the air and on the floor. The concrete responded, lines of light glowing brighter, lifting into the air like holograms, forming shapes that resembled planets, stars, and wormholes. The hum became a song, a complex resonance that reverberated through the structure, reaching outward. The walls seemed to breathe with her movements, expanding and contracting slightly as if alive. Outside, the hunters paused, scanning. One of them raised a device, something long and sleek, black as obsidian, and fired a pulse. The wave hit the observatory, but instead of breaking through, it bent around the structure as if repelled by a force field. Owen realized with a shock that Lyra herself had become a node, a conduit, channeling energy into the building and warping the very physics of the air around them. He stumbled back, heart hammering. Lyra, be careful. She didn't look at him. Her focus was absolute, the light in her skin flaring so brightly it illuminated every corner of the shattered observatory. Visions flickered behind his eyes, unbidden, distant galaxies, planets wrapped in glowing filaments, civilizations rising and falling in a heartbeat. The veil was more than a machine, it was a network spanning light years, dormant gates connecting worlds. Her captors had wanted it, and by freeing her, Owen had unknowingly pulled it into consciousness again. The hunters advanced, stepping cautiously as drones hovered, scanning and probing. But the energy Lyra emitted created distortions in space itself. Shadows bent away from her light. Lasers refracted and missed their target. Even the ground beneath their feet rippled faintly, giving them pause. Owen realized the fight wasn't with conventional weapons, it was with something far older, far stranger. Lyra's voice rose, a harmonic chorus that resonated through his chest. Owen, must trust, connect, stabilize. He nodded, feeling a strange compulsion. He knelt beside her, pressing a hand over hers on the floor. A jolt of energy ran through him, not painful, but invasive, as if it sought to rewrite his perception. He saw the veil as she did, nodes of light and matter, corridors between stars, flows of energy connecting worlds. He understood, suddenly, that he was now a participant in something far larger than himself. The hunters hesitated, sensing the shift. Their devices flickered and sparked, unable to penetrate the expanding field around the observatory. The ground beneath their feet shimmered with silver filaments, wrapping around machinery, drawing it harmlessly into the soil. Owen realized then that Lyra wasn't just defending herself. She was rewriting the environment around them, reclaiming it. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. The veil's resonance reached a crescendo, vibrating the building with power both beautiful and terrifying. Lyra's body glowed with constellations in motion, and Owen could feel a connection, a shared heartbeat that bound them to the same rhythm. Outside, the hunters finally backed away, their approach delayed, though not defeated. Owen's mind spun. "We can't stay here forever," he said. Lyra's voice was calm, almost serene. "We prepare. They come again, must learn, understand. Veil, alive, protects." He looked at her, at the shimmering constellations across her skin, and realized that she was no longer just a girl he had rescued. She was a force of cosmic scale, the last interface to a network humanity barely comprehended. The hunters were only a part of the danger, they would return, stronger, smarter. But for the first time, Owen felt a spark of hope. They could fight. They could survive. And the veil, ancient and sentient, hummed beneath them, awake once more. Owen had never believed in the kind of power that made the universe feel small, yet there it was, thrumming beneath his fingertips. Lyra sat across from him on the floor of the ruined observatory, her golden eyes reflecting the cascading constellations that pulsed beneath her skin. Every breath she took seemed to ripple through the building, the light in her veins stretching outward into the concrete, the walls, the shattered telescope above. He had never felt more connected to another being, or more insignificant. "Tell me what's happening," he said, voice raw from exhaustion. He had barely slept, barely eaten, every moment spent watching her interface with the veil had been a lesson in awe and terror. She tilted her head, and for the first time, she spoke in full sentences, her voice carrying a resonance that made the floor hum faintly under his weight. "The veil, it is older than your sun, older than your galaxy. It remembers worlds that no longer exist. It connects them, balances them, protects the living from what dies." Her hands moved over the glowing circuitry traced into the floor, and the air thickened with energy, folding light into impossible shapes. "When I was trapped, they tried to force me to open gates, to siphon its energy, to weaponize it. That is why I could not move before." Owen listened, leaning closer, fascinated and terrified. "And now? Now, we awaken it. I can feel the nodes responding. Earth itself hums in acknowledgement." She extended a trembling hand, and the floor beneath it rippled like liquid metal. Shapes unfolded into three-dimensional constellations, twisting and reforming, stars connecting by beams of silver light. He could feel it in his chest, a pulse, steady, rhythmic, and yet chaotic, as though his own heartbeat was merging with the rhythm of the cosmos. Outside, the hunters had regrouped. Small drones hovered near the tree-line, and larger craft moved silently above the treetops. But the energy Lyra projected disrupted their sensors. Their beams bent, misfiring, and the metallic surfaces of their vehicles shimmered like liquid, reflecting their own confusion. Owen realized that they were witnessing something far beyond human comprehension, something that humans were never meant to see or control. Lyra whispered, almost to herself, "The veil communicates through energy, through memory, through life itself. It is alive." She traced a symbol in the air, and the room responded, walls stretching and warping slightly, images flickering in the shadows, star systems, cities of glass and light, civilizations rising and falling in milliseconds. They wanted it as a tool. It is not a tool. It is a guardian. Owen reached out, hesitantly placing his hand over hers on the glowing pattern. The instant he did, a shockwave of perception hit him. He saw what she saw, distant planets with rivers of light, stars collapsing and reforming, civilizations communicating across light years through conduits of energy. He understood, instinctively, overwhelmingly, that their lives, the house, the forest, even Earth itself, were nodes within a vast, interconnected lattice. The veil was more than a network. It was the skeleton of life across the galaxy. The hum rose to a deafening crescendo, and the observatory trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the broken telescope lens above them began to glow faintly, reflecting the constellations beneath Lyra's skin. Energy streaked outward from her fingers, connecting with the remains of the observatory like veins of liquid starlight. Owen stumbled, gripping the floor, but the connection between him and Lyra anchored him. He felt her fear, her power, her determination, all merging into something monumental. Suddenly, the hunters attacked. The forest erupted in motion. Vehicles and drones charged, scanning beams slicing through the night. Owen froze, expecting death, but the beams bent around the observatory, hitting the trees and the ground harmlessly. The floor beneath Lyra shimmered, creating a protective dome of kinetic energy. He realized that she wasn't just defending herself, they couldn't touch her. She was the veil, and it answered only to her will. "Don't look at them," she warned, eyes closed as she concentrated. "Focus, feel the network." He did as she said, closing his eyes and letting the vibrations flow through him. The pulse of energy beneath them expanded outward, reaching into the earth, the forest, the sky, and beyond. The hunters faltered, disoriented, and some of the drones collapsed, systems fried by interference he could barely comprehend. The larger ships twisted in midair as if reality itself bent against them. Owen's vision blurred, and he felt himself merging with her perception. He saw gates forming, nodes awakening, and paths through spacetime stretching like threads of silver silk. Lyra's energy intertwined with his, showing him memories that weren't his own, glimpses of civilizations wiped out by war, the birth of stars, the quiet patience of worlds waiting to be remembered. Then, abruptly, it calmed. The pulse slowed, the lights beneath her skin dimmed to a gentle glow, and the building settled. The hunters had retreated, their technology unable to breach the field Lyra had manifested. Owen sank to the floor, breathless, shaken by the vastness of what he had just experienced. She opened her eyes and smiled faintly, exhausted but radiant. "This is only the beginning," she said. "They will come again. Others will come. But we now know the Veil. And it knows us." Owen nodded, still overwhelmed. He realized, finally, that he was no longer just a human trying to survive. He was part of a network, a cosmic struggle that spanned worlds and centuries. And by her side, he would have to learn what it meant to protect life on a scale he had never imagined. Above them, the night sky shifted, stars flickering in patterns that almost resembled words, almost like a message, welcoming them, or warning them, that the universe had begun to notice their presence. The house waited. Not in the way a building waits, but in the way a living thing waits, patient, aware, humming faintly in the ground beneath the forest. Owen and Lyra approached it cautiously, the moonlight glinting off the warped shingles and the remnants of broken windows. He had expected it to be silent, inert, a memory of the terror it had once contained, but as they neared, he could feel the energy rising again, pulsing like a heartbeat from deep beneath the floorboards. The ground beneath their feet vibrated faintly, calling to Lyra, whispering promises and warnings in a language older than Earth itself. "This is where it began," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight beyond words. "Where I was trapped, where they wanted to take me. The house is a fragment of the veil. It is the anchor. The node. Everything we saw before, it started here." Owen swallowed hard. Every instinct told him to stay back, but he could not leave her to face the final confrontation alone. The hunters had regrouped since the last encounter, far more numerous, better prepared. Drones zipped between the trees and strange black vehicles with angular surfaces and refracting lenses formed a perimeter around the property. He could feel the hum of their technology scanning the area, probing for Lyra's signature. She stepped forward first, and Owen followed, the forest floor rippling faintly with every pulse that escaped her. As they entered the house, the walls reacted immediately. Panels warped, expanding slightly, dust and debris lifted as though caught in a gravity field. The building was alive, a fragment of the veil made solid, responding to her presence, anticipating her movements. The final confrontation began beneath the floorboards. Owen pried open the trapdoor, revealing the chamber where Lyra had once been imprisoned. It had changed. Metallic roots and glowing conduits snaked along the walls, pulsating with blue and silver light. At the center, a faint sphere hovered, a dormant fragment of the veil node, waiting for Lyra to reconnect. The hunters surged, trying to breach the chamber. Beams of energy, nets of metallic threads, and explosive projectiles struck the walls and floor, but they bent, fractured, and dissipated in impossible ways. Owen realized that the house itself, integrated with the veil, was defending them. It twisted physics subtly, creating interference, rerouting energy, and protecting the anchor point. The forest trembled outside, the air thick with static. Lyra approached the sphere. Her skin glowed brighter than ever, constellations moving across her body in fast, complex patterns. She raised her hands, and the sphere responded, folding space within itself, opening conduits that stretched outward into the planet, into the sky, and far beyond, into the network of the veil. Owen watched in awe as she connected, her consciousness intertwining with the ancient machinery. "They want it," she said quietly, almost to herself. "But it will not be taken. Not by them. Not by anyone." Energy surged through the chamber, wrapping around the hunters outside. Their drones spiraled out of control, collapsing midair. Vehicles rocked violently as localized distortions disrupted gravity and magnetism. Even human operators experienced strange visions, fragments of distant worlds flashing before their eyes, warnings they could not comprehend. Lyra's connection had become absolute, the veil was alive, and it recognized its protector. Owen stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. He felt the pulse of the veil, a rhythm so vast it stretched through time and space, filling him with awe and fear. "Can we stop them for good?" he asked. She met his gaze, eyes luminous and certain. "We can. But it will take everything, including us." He nodded. There was no hesitation, only trust. Together, they focused on the sphere. Light exploded from the chamber, expanding outward like liquid stars, enveloping the house, the trees, and the hunters. The floorboards pulsed, walls bent in impossible angles, and Owen felt himself lifted into the rhythm of the veil. Memories, visions, and echoes of civilizations long dead flowed into his mind, connecting him to the network. He saw the hunters fall back, their weapons rendered useless, their understanding incapable of comprehending the force they had provoked. Then, in a final surge, the house itself shimmered, expanded, and transformed. The walls became light, the floor dissolved into a lattice of energy, and the sphere at the center merged with Lyra, forming a singular beacon of power. In that moment, the veil had been anchored, stabilized. The hunters could not follow, their pursuit cut off by the awakening of something far greater than they were. When the energy subsided, the house was gone. Only the forest remained, eerily silent and still, the soil pulsing faintly like a heartbeat beneath the surface. Lyra stood at the edge of the clearing, exhausted but radiant, her skin dimly glowing with the constellations now steady and calm. Owen approached, taking her hand. "It's over," he said softly. "For now," she replied, a faint smile crossing her features. "The veil will always watch. And now, it watches with us." They walked from the clearing together, the first rays of sunlight illuminating their path. The forest seemed alive, vibrant, and undisturbed, as though the conflict had never touched it. Owen glanced back at the faint outline of the soil where the house had been, noticing a soft, pulsing scar, a single mark of light buried beneath the earth, the heartbeat of a node that had survived, waiting, steady. He realized then that nothing would ever be truly normal again. They were no longer merely human and alien, they were custodians of a network spanning worlds, guardians of a force older than the stars. And yet, in that moment, the enormity of their responsibility was tempered by the quiet peace of survival. Owen squeezed Lyra's hand. "We did it," he said. She nodded, looking up at the sky, where faint patterns of starlight seemed to wink in acknowledgement. "We did," she whispered. And for the first time in centuries, the veil was at rest, and they could finally step into a future of their own making.